My name is Sarah Nguyen. I'm 25 years old, and at that age, I believed I was stepping into the kind of life I had always quietly hoped for: stable, warm, maybe even ordinary in the best way. Looking back now, I realize that the first chapter of my story wasn't really a dream coming true. It was just the beginning of a lesson I didn't know I needed. I met Michael on a humid Friday evening downtown. I was an accountant at a mid-sized firm, the kind of job that made my parents nod approvingly when I told them about it, even if it didn't exactly thrill me. Numbers don't lie, I used to say when people asked why I liked it. They stay still when the world keeps spinning. Michael wasn't like that. He worked in marketing at a startup, full of bright ideas and louder people. Where my world was spreadsheets and steady calculation, his was all spark and performance. I met him through friends at a happy hour. He had the kind of energy that filled a room before he even spoke, a confidence that made you want to lean in, listen harder. The first time our eyes met, he smiled like we already shared a secret. We talked for hours that night. He teased me for being too serious, and I teased him back for being too reckless. He bought me a gin and tonic, and when I admitted I preferred simple red wine, he laughed and said, "Of course you do. You're the type who finds comfort in routines." It should have sounded like criticism, but the way he said it, I felt seen and wanted. For that first year, we felt like a perfect match. I learned to soften, to let myself be surprised. He learned, at least in those early days, to appreciate the calm I brought. We balanced each other. At least I thought so. I remember little things, picking up flowers from the corner grocery store and watching his face light up when I handed them to him, planning a picnic on a sunny Saturday in the park, cooking dinner for him after his stressful days at work. He'd stretch out on the couch, loosen his tie, and say, "You're too good to me, Sarah." I'd laugh, because wasn't this what love was supposed to be? Taking care of each other in small and gentle ways? Sometimes he'd pull me close and whisper, "You make me feel like home." Those words carried me through so many quiet nights, believing that no matter how restless the world became, we'd built something solid together. But even then, beneath those moments, there were shadows I ignored. Michael loved attention. That much was obvious from the start. He thrived on being the loudest storyteller at a party, the one whose jokes drew laughter from strangers across the bar. At first, I thought it was charming. I was quieter, more measured, and his brilliance in a crowd felt like the perfect counterbalance to my steadiness. But sometimes, when we were alone, I noticed his eyes wandering, to his phone, to the idea of the next event, to what others thought of him. Once during dinner, he checked Instagram 3 times while I was telling him about a client case that had kept me late at work. He didn't even notice when I stopped mid-sentence. I brushed it off, telling myself he was just tired, distracted. Love is about compromise, isn't it? Still, there was something in the way he always looked outward, toward what was shinier, louder, more glamorous, that made me uneasy. I ignored it. After all, didn't we all have flaws? Mine was being too cautious, too practical. His was craving more. At least that's what I told myself. The first time I met his new friends was when the seed of doubt really began to sprout. Michael had joined a yoga class and grown close to a couple of people there, Brandon and his girlfriend Brianna, and another girl named Ashley, who was dating a businessman named Marcus. They were different from the people I usually spent time with. Flashy, polished, the kind of people who casually dropped vacation spots into conversation like they were talking about errands. At first, I tried to fit in. I wore my nicest dresses to the group dinners, though I always felt underdressed next to Brianna's designer heels and Ashley's gleaming jewelry. When the check came, I'd stiffen as Brandon and Marcus ordered cocktails that cost more than my entire grocery bill. Michael would nudge me under the table and say, "Relax, it's just one night out." But those nights out became routine, and slowly Michael's eyes changed. After one of those dinners, as we walked back to his car, Michael said almost offhandedly, "Did you see that bracelet Marcus bought Ashley? It must have been at least a couple grand." I smiled, a little unsure. It was beautiful, but honestly, I prefer simple things. You know that. He glanced at me, then looked away. "Yeah, simple, that's you." There was something in his tone I couldn't quite place. Admiration or disappointment? I wanted to believe it was the first, but the silence that followed told me otherwise. It didn't happen all at once. It was little comments, little sighs, little looks across the table at Brianna's diamond earrings or Ashley's designer purse. Michael started to joke with his friends. Sarah's practical. She's not into all that romantic stuff. They'd laugh, and I'd smile tightly, pretending not to feel the sting. Because I was romantic, just not in the way they measured it. To me, romance was cooking his favorite meal when he'd had a long day. It was listening to his stories, even when they stretched on. It was holding him when his startup plans fell through, telling him he was enough even without success. But maybe my way wasn't enough for him. There's a memory that still clings to me. We were walking through a department store and he stopped in front of a glass display case. Inside was a sleek, expensive watch. He stared at it, his reflection ghosted over the polished surface. "That's the kind of thing Marcus would buy," he muttered. I slipped my hand into his. "You don't need a watch like that to prove anything." He smiled faintly, but his eyes stayed on the glass. Maybe not, but it wouldn't hurt. That was the moment I felt the first real crack. It was small, silent, almost invisible, but it was there, waiting. If I had listened to my instincts then, maybe the rest of this story wouldn't have happened. But I was in love, and love, I told myself, is patient. Love endures. I didn't know yet that sometimes patience only delays heartbreak. I didn't know yet that endurance can be mistaken for silence. And I certainly didn't know that this was the last time I would ever feel secure standing by Michael's side. If the first year of my relationship with Michael felt like a dream, the second year began to feel like an audition. It started innocently enough. He began spending more time with his yoga friends, Brandon and Brianna, and Ashley with her boyfriend Marcus. At first I thought it was sweet. I liked that he had a group he could laugh with outside of work. But soon it became clear that this wasn't just friendship. It was comparison fuel. The first dinner with them set the tone. We met at a sleek steakhouse downtown, the kind where the menu had no prices listed for half the entrees. I wore my favorite navy dress, the one my mother had complimented at Christmas. But sitting next to Brianna's shimmering green gown and Ashley's designer bag that cost more than my month's rent, I felt like a child playing dress-up. Brandon arrived late, tossing his car keys onto the table with a clink. A BMW logo glinted up at me. He kissed Brianna's cheek and announced, "Sorry, traffic on the way back from the dealership. Thought I'd trade in for something sportier." The table erupted in admiration. Marcus chimed in with a story about his upcoming trip to Napa with Ashley, a surprise weekend getaway. Michael laughed and played along, but I caught his eyes flickering toward me, measuring, comparing. I smiled tightly, sipping water instead of the $20 cocktails they ordered. Later that week, Michael mentioned it in passing. "Brandon's car is incredible, makes my sedan feel like a toy." I shrugged. "It gets us where we need to go. Isn't that enough?" "Sure," he said, but his tone was heavy. "It's just, sometimes I wish we had a little more excitement, something to show for ourselves." I wanted to ask show who, but I stayed quiet. As months passed, the comments multiplied. After a brunch, he came home sighing. "Brianna said Brandon surprised her with a bracelet, white gold. Can you believe that?" "That's sweet," I said carefully. "She was glowing, Sarah. You should have seen her. Don't you think that's romantic?" I hesitated. "Yes, but romance doesn't always have to be about money, does it?" His silence said otherwise. I doubled my efforts. I brought him flowers. I baked his favorite lemon tart. I suggested small weekend trips we could actually afford. A cabin by the lake, hiking trails, a bed and breakfast. Michael's responses became thinner each time. A forced smile, a distracted thank you. Once he actually said, "Sarah, you don't need to do that," but not in the bashful, appreciative way he used to. No, this time it sounded almost embarrassed, as though my little gestures weren't worthy of being mentioned in the same breath as his friends' diamond gifts and luxury trips. The worst part wasn't just his change in attitude, it was the way his friends began to treat me. At one dinner, Brandon leaned back in his chair, flashing his new Rolex. He turned to Michael and smirked. "You know what they say, safe guys keep a budget, bold guys keep a woman smiling." Ashley laughed too loudly. "Exactly. A man has to know a woman's worth." She turned to me, her tone sugary sweet. "Don't you agree, Sarah?" I smiled politely, though my stomach twisted. I think worth isn't measured in gifts. The table fell silent for a beat before Brandon clinked his glass and changed the subject. But Michael didn't defend me. He didn't even look at me. Instead, he laughed with them, like he was part of their club and I was just extra. At home, I finally asked him why he never stood up for me. "They're just joking, Sarah," he said. "Don't take it so seriously." "Maybe," I whispered, "but it doesn't feel like a joke when you join in." He sighed, already reaching for his phone. "You're too sensitive sometimes." The words stung because they mirrored the voice already living in my head. I began to dread those dinners. I'd sit across the table from Brianna and Ashley, their wrists glittering with new jewelry, their social media feeds glowing with exotic vacations. Michael's friends had mastered the art of spectacle, loud stories, designer outfits, expensive wines. And Michael, my Michael, shrank next to me. His smile tightened. His gaze drifted. He compared me not with words, but with silence, with the way his shoulders sagged when the spotlight turned away from us. I tried to bring him back with conversation, but it never worked. He seemed more alive in their world than in mine. One night, after an especially humiliating dinner, where Ashley had asked in front of everyone why Michael hadn't put a ring on it yet, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Michael was asleep beside me, his breathing steady. And I thought, when did I become someone he apologizes for? The pattern only deepened. Michael began to suggest we try pricier restaurants. It's good for appearances, he explained. When I reminded him that I was saving for a down payment on a house, he gave me a frustrated look. You're always saving for something, he muttered. Don't you ever want to live? The implication was clear. My practicality was a flaw. My stability was a chain. That summer, I planned a quiet evening at home, takeout from his favorite Thai place, a movie he'd been meaning to see, fairy lights strung across the balcony. He spent the whole time scrolling through Instagram, laughing at Brianna's vacation posts. Look, they're in Santorini. Can you imagine? I set down my glass, the lights above me flickering faintly. For the first time, I realized I was competing with people I'd never be able to match. No matter how much love I poured into Michael, it was never going to sparkle the way their wealth did. But I still wasn't ready to let go. I told myself it was a phase, that he'd realize sooner or later what really mattered. And yet, somewhere deep inside, I could feel the ground shifting beneath me. I could feel the walls of our relationship closing in, squeezing tighter with every forced laugh, every comparison, every silent car ride home from yet another extravagant dinner. Looking back, I see it clearly. This was the middle chapter of the unraveling. The part of the story where the foundation begins to crack, where the storm gathers just out of sight. And I was the fool who thought love could hold it together. By the time autumn rolled around, dinners with Michael's friends felt less like gatherings and more like rituals of comparison. I'd dress up, smile politely, order something modest, and wait for the inevitable moment when the spotlight turned on me. Not to celebrate me, but to remind me how little I measured up in their world. Still, I stayed. Some part of me believed that if I just endured, Michael would eventually look past all the glitter and remember the love we'd built, but I was wrong. The breaking point came one Friday night in October. We were meeting Brandon, Brianna, Ashley, and Marcus at an upscale steakhouse downtown. From the moment we walked in, I felt out of place. The chandeliers sparkled like frozen fire above us, the waiters gliding by in crisp uniforms. Everyone else at our table looked like they'd stepped out of a magazine. Brianna in a silk dress, Ashley with diamond earrings that caught the light. I smoothed my simple black dress, the one I'd worn to my cousin's wedding years ago. Michael barely glanced at me as he ordered a martini. The conversation flowed the same way it always did. Brandon bragged about his car, Marcus about his business. Brianna showed off photos from their Paris trip. First class all the way, she chirped, holding her phone for everyone to see. Michael leaned in eagerly, his eyes devouring the images. I sat quietly, tracing the rim of my water glass, until Ashley gasped as Marcus slid a Tiffany box across the table. Open it, Marcus urged. Ashley squealed, revealing a diamond tennis bracelet that glittered brighter than the chandeliers. She kissed him noisily while the table applauded. I smiled, though my stomach was heavy. Then I saw Michael's face. He wasn't just impressed. He was envious. Wow, Michael said, his voice tinged with something sharp. You guys are lucky. Luck has nothing to do with it, Marcus replied smugly. It's about knowing how to treat your woman. The words landed like stones in my chest. I waited for Michael to defend me, to at least squeeze my hand under the table. Instead, he ordered another martini. I tried to redirect. It really is a lovely bracelet, Ashley. It suits you. Thanks, Sarah, she said, her tone dripping with patronizing sweetness. It's important to be with someone who prioritizes making you feel special. Laughter bubbled around the table, but I couldn't breathe. I stared at my plate, my cheeks burning. That's when Michael snapped. You know what? I'm tired of pretending. His voice cut through the noise, sharp enough to silence the entire table. I looked at him, my heart already sinking. Michael, what do you mean? He gestured around. Look at this table, Sarah. Brandon takes Brianna to Paris. Marcus showers Ashley with jewelry. And what do I get? The words hit me before I could brace myself. Michael leaned back in his chair, his voice growing louder. I get grocery store flowers and movie nights at home. I get boring stability. Everyone here knows I could do better. Hell, I'm embarrassed to be here with you. The restaurant fell silent. Even the couple at the next table froze mid-bite, their eyes fixed on us. I couldn't move. My pulse thundered in my ears, but my body felt hollow, weightless. I searched his face for some sign that this was a cruel joke, but all I saw was contempt, and worse, a strange relief, like he'd finally unburdened himself. My hands trembled as I reached for my purse. I didn't argue, I didn't beg, I didn't even cry. Instead, I pulled out my wallet, placed enough cash on the table to cover not just our meals, but everyone's. The bills fluttered against the white tablecloth like fallen leaves. The table gasped. Brandon muttered, "What the hell?" I stood, my voice steady though my insides shook. Dinner's on me. Consider it my farewell gift. Michael's eyes widened. Sarah. But I didn't let him finish. Enjoy your evening, I said, turning on my heel. I walked out of that restaurant with every pair of eyes burning into my back. In the parking lot, the cold air hit me like a slap. I slid into the driver's seat, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly they ached. My chest heaved, my breath fogging the windshield as I sat there in silence. The words replayed in my head. I'm embarrassed to be here with you. 2 years of love, 2 years of patience, 2 years of believing I was enough, reduced to a punchline in front of people who'd never cared about me. I felt like I might throw up, but beneath the nausea, there was something else, something steadier. Anger. Not just at Michael, but at myself. For all the nights I'd ignored the warning signs. For every time I told myself love was supposed to hurt a little, for mistaking humiliation for compromise. I drove home, the city lights blurring through tears I refused to let fall. When I stepped into my apartment, the silence pressed against me like a heavy blanket. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the couch, staring at the door. For the first time in months, I thought clearly. Michael wasn't just restless. He wasn't just distracted. He was ashamed of me. And once shame takes root, it doesn't leave. That night, I made a decision I didn't say out loud yet. Our relationship was over. When Michael stumbled home past midnight, reeking of alcohol, he mumbled, "Sarah, you awake? I think I drank too much." I closed my eyes, feigning sleep, because what could I possibly say to a man who had already chosen humiliation over love? The morning after that dinner, sunlight streamed through the blinds like nothing had happened. The air smelled faintly of coffee. Michael was already in the kitchen, humming as though he hadn't torn me to pieces the night before. He looked up when I walked in. "Hey, I made us coffee. Thought we could see a movie later." I stared at him, my hands still trembling from the memory of last night. A movie? Yeah, something light. Comedy, maybe. He smiled like we were any normal couple, like he hadn't humiliated me in front of a room full of strangers and so-called friends. I set the mug down hard. "Michael, what you said at dinner." He waved his hand. "I was drunk, Sarah. You know how I get. I didn't mean it." But he had meant it. I saw it in his eyes, the same way I had seen it in every sigh, every disappointed glance, every comparison he'd made in the past year. "You did mean it," I whispered. He frowned. "Why are you being so dramatic? I said I was sorry." "No," I said firmly. "You didn't, not once." Something inside me cracked open then. Not like glass shattering, but like a door swinging wide after being locked too long. "I think we need a break," I said. Michael laughed, the sound bitter. "A break? Come on, Sarah, don't do this. Don't throw away what we have because of one bad night." "One bad night?" My voice rose, trembling with the weight of months of swallowed pain. "Michael, you've been chipping away at me for a year. Last night was just the final blow. You said you were embarrassed to be with me. Do you understand what that does to someone?" His jaw tightened. "You're overreacting." "No," I said quietly. "I'm finally reacting." That afternoon, I packed a bag. Michael paced the living room, alternating between pleading and snapping. "You're just running away," he said. "That's what you do. You hide when things get tough." I zipped my suitcase. "No, Michael, I've been here all along, fighting for us, while you compared me to everyone else. The only one running away has been you, into a life you think will make you look better." He stopped, blinking, as though the truth had finally pierced through. "Sarah." But I didn't wait to hear the rest. I left. I stayed with my best friend Hannah for the next week. Her apartment was cluttered with art supplies and smelled like lavender candles, a sharp contrast to the sterile emptiness my life with Michael had become. Each night, she'd pour me tea and listen without judgment as I replayed every detail, every cutting remark. "Do you realize how strong you were at that dinner?" Hannah said one night. "Most people would have crumbled, but you paid for the whole table and walked out with your dignity. That's not weakness, Sarah. That's power." Her words sank into me slowly, like rain after a drought. Michael didn't stop calling. The first few days, his voicemails were furious. "You're being childish. You can't just disappear." By midweek, they shifted. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I messed up. Please, let's talk." By Friday, desperation leaked through his voice. "I can't lose you. I'll change. Just come home." I didn't answer. Because for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt clarity. On Saturday, when I knew he'd be out with his friends, I went back to the apartment. The rooms looked smaller, emptier, even though nothing had changed. His cologne lingered in the air, mixed with the faint scent of the coffee machine we'd shared. I packed my clothes, my books, the little mementos of my life that had been overshadowed by his need for spectacle. I left the framed photos on the walls. They didn't feel like mine anymore. Before I left, I placed my key on the kitchen counter. I stared at it for a long time, a tiny piece of metal that had once meant belonging. Now it was nothing but a symbol of chains I no longer wanted to wear. I didn't leave a note. What was there to say? He'd made his feelings clear. I was never going to be enough for him, and I finally believed him. I moved into a small studio across town, the kind of place that wouldn't impress anyone on Instagram, but to me, it was freedom. The paint on the walls was chipped, the radiator rattled at night, and the view was just the alley below. Still, I felt lighter than I had in years. I changed my phone number, blocked Michael on every platform, told my friends and family that we'd broken up and that I didn't want to talk about it. For the first time in a long time, the silence was mine. Of course, Michael didn't take it well. Through Hannah, I learned that he'd called her repeatedly, begging for my new number. He showed up at my old job, only to find out I'd transferred to another office. He even sent messages through mutual acquaintances, pathetic, half-hearted attempts at reaching me. But I didn't respond. I refused to let him drag me back into his orbit. And somewhere along the way, the fury I felt toward him faded. Not into forgiveness, but into something quieter. Acceptance. He had shown me exactly who he was, and now it was up to me to decide who I wanted to be. For months, I kept my life simple. Work, home, long walks, evenings with Hannah. I picked up hobbies I'd abandoned, sketching, yoga, baking. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected. I started to see myself not as the girl Michael had belittled, but as the woman who had walked away. And every time I caught myself smiling without reason, every time I laughed with friends and realized the sound was genuine, I knew leaving him was the bravest thing I had ever done. That chapter of my life had ended, but as I would learn soon enough, Michael wasn't finished with his own unraveling. And when his world finally collapsed, mine was only just beginning to rebuild. 18 months. That's how long it had been since I walked away from Michael. 18 months since the night I left my key on the counter and stepped out of his life without looking back. People talk about healing like it's some straight path, but it's not. It's a messy climb, full of stumbles and nights when you wonder if you've made a mistake. But with every passing week, I found myself breathing easier, laughing more, recognizing the woman in the mirror again. The first few months alone, I focused on survival. Work, gym, sleep, repeat. I poured myself into the structure of my accounting job, chasing promotions and certifications as though achievement could patch the holes in my chest. But it wasn't just running away. Slowly, it became building. Within 8 months, I was promoted to senior associate. My manager told me, "You've got grit, Sarah. You don't let anything shake you." If only he knew the truth. I'd already been shaken to pieces. I was just learning how to rearrange them into something stronger. Meanwhile, through whispers from mutual acquaintances, I learned about Michael's life after me. At first, he seemed to thrive. He dated a string of women, each more polished and glamorous than the last, at least on paper. Instagram pictures of rooftop bars, fancy cocktails, beach vacations. But underneath, the stories weren't pretty. One woman found out he was still seeing someone else. Another discovered he was living off credit cards. A third told a friend of mine that he expected her to sleep with him after one expensive dinner, as though affection could be bought like dessert. And then his glittering circle began to collapse. Brandon, the BMW driving show-off, got caught cheating on Brianna with someone from his gym. The investment portfolio he bragged about turned out to be a mountain of debt, and the car was leased. Brianna dumped him, and not quietly. She posted the receipts all over social media. Marcus, the generous businessman, was exposed for running a multi-level marketing scam. When it collapsed, Ashley discovered the jewelry he'd given her had been bought with borrowed money. She left him too, humiliated. In the aftermath, Michael was left clinging to the same crumbling image he had once envied. His perfect friends were nothing more than frauds hiding behind smoke and mirrors. I should have felt vindicated, and maybe, for a moment, I did, but mostly I just felt free. Their collapse was no longer my story. My story was beginning again. I started dating slowly. Coffee dates, casual dinners, nothing serious. Just learning how to talk to someone new without shrinking under the weight of comparison. And then, one Saturday afternoon, I met Ethan. I was in a bookstore downtown, my sanctuary, the kind of place where time slips away and you forget the world outside exists. I was crouched in the biography section when a stack of books tumbled to the floor beside me. "Sorry," a voice exclaimed. I turned and found a man in glasses, smiling sheepishly as he scrambled to gather them. Children's books, all bright covers and whimsical titles. "Kindergarten teacher?" I guessed, handing him one. He blinked in surprise. "Close, university professor. But I volunteer reading at the library. Kids are better audiences than grad students, honestly." I laughed, the sound bubbling up before I could stop it. "I bet they are." He glanced at the book in my hand. "And you? Numbers or novels?" "Numbers," I admitted. "I'm an accountant, not nearly as charming as a room full of 5-year-olds. "Don't sell yourself short," he said warmly. "Numbers make sense. 5-year-olds are chaos with crayons." Something in the way he said it, without pretense, without judgment, made me want to keep talking. And so we did. For 2 hours, sitting on the floor between shelves, trading stories about books, work, childhood dreams. Ethan wasn't flashy. He didn't drive a sports car or wear designer watches. He carried a worn leather satchel filled with papers to grade, and his shoes had seen better days. But when I mentioned I was considering going back for my CPA, his eyes lit up. "That's amazing," he said. "What made you decide that?" Not, "Why would you want more school?" Not, "Isn't that too much work?" Just genuine enthusiasm for my goals. For the first time, I felt like being myself wasn't something to apologize for. Our first dates were simple: coffee shops, long walks, cooking dinner together. When I brought him flowers, he didn't roll his eyes. He laughed, kissed my forehead, and said, "No one's ever done that for me." When I surprised him with homemade lasagna after a stressful week, he looked at me like I'd hung the moon. "This is the most romantic thing anyone's ever done for me," he whispered. With Ethan, I didn't have to compete with Paris trips or diamond bracelets. My small gestures weren't embarrassing. They were cherished. And slowly, I began to realize this is what love was supposed to feel like. A year into dating, Ethan proposed. Not with a grand spectacle, but on a hiking trail where we'd once talked for hours about our dreams. The leaves rustled overhead, sunlight streaming through the branches. He knelt, holding out a simple ring, his voice trembling. "Sarah, you've taught me that love isn't about fireworks. It's about warmth, steadiness, and showing up every day. Will you marry me?" My heart swelled. "Yes," I whispered before he even finished. Planning our engagement party felt like stepping into an alternate universe. Ethan didn't want glitz or glamour. He wanted joy, laughter, and the people we loved. We settled on Hannah's backyard. Strings of fairy lights, simple food, music, and 50 people who cared about us, not about appearances. The night of the party, I stood in a blue dress, my parents beaming as they hugged Ethan. Friends toasted us, laughter filled the air, and for the first time in years, I felt completely safe. I thought I'd left Michael behind forever, but ghosts have a way of showing up when you least expect them. The night of our engagement party felt like something out of a dream. Hannah's backyard was strung with soft fairy lights that swayed gently in the evening breeze. Tables were scattered with simple white flowers in mason jars. A buffet of homemade dishes lined one side of the yard, and laughter spilled through the air like music. Ethan's hand was warm in mine as we moved from group to group, greeting guests, accepting hugs, clinking glasses of champagne. My parents adored him. My friends teased me about how radiant I looked, and every time I caught Ethan's eyes across the yard, I knew I had finally chosen right. For the first time in years, I wasn't bracing myself for judgment. I wasn't shrinking beside anyone. I was just happy. And then I saw him. By the gate, half hidden in the shadows, stood Michael. He wore a dark suit far too formal for our backyard gathering, a gift bag clutched awkwardly in one hand. His posture was uncertain, his eyes darting nervously as though he wasn't sure whether to step in or flee. My stomach dropped. It had been nearly 3 years since I'd last seen him. 3 years since the night I left my key on the counter and vanished from his life, and yet here he was, an unwelcome ghost at the doorstep of my joy. Before he could move further into the party, I slipped away from the crowd and intercepted him at the gate. "Michael," I said quietly. His eyes flicked up, relief flooding his face. "Sarah, hi." I folded my arms. "What are you doing here?" He held out the bag like a peace offering. I just wanted to say congratulations. I brought a gift." "How did you even know about this?" "I saw Hannah's post on Instagram," he admitted, his voice low. "I shouldn't be here, I know, but I had to see you, just once more." I glanced back at the yard. Ethan was laughing with my father, completely unaware of the storm brewing at the gate. My throat tightened. "Michael, this is our engagement party. You need to leave." "Please," he said, desperation spilling into his voice. "Just let me talk to you for a minute." I studied him, and the change was undeniable. The confident man who once sneered at my simplicity was gone. He looked older, his shoulders sagging, his eyes hollow. The sharp edge of arrogance had been dulled into something almost pitiful. "I made a mistake," he said, his voice trembling. "The biggest mistake of my life. I thought I wanted excitement. I thought I needed flash. But it was all empty, Sarah. You were the one who made me feel grounded, real. I didn't see it then, but I do now." His words might have moved me once, but now they fell flat against the steel I'd built inside. "Michael," I said softly, "you didn't lose me because you weren't rich. You lost me because you were ashamed of me, because you humiliated me. Love doesn't survive shame." He flinched. "I was young, stupid. I let other people get in my head." His eyes glistened. "But I've changed. I swear I have. Please, just let me meet him. Let me meet the man you chose instead of me." "No." My voice was sharp enough to slice the air between us. "Sarah." I shook my head. "You don't get to be part of this. This is my life now, my happiness, and you have no place in it." For a long moment he just stood there, his jaw tight, his eyes pleading. Then his shoulders slumped. "I made such a mess of us," he whispered, "and now I have to live with it." "Yes," I said, "you do." He looked at me one last time, then turned and walked away, the gift bag still dangling from his hand. I watched until his figure disappeared into the night, a shadow swallowed by the streetlights. And for the first time since the night of that humiliating dinner, I felt completely free. When I returned to the party, Ethan spotted me immediately. "There you are. Everything okay?" I smiled, slipping my hand into his. "Perfect." He studied me for a moment, as if sensing there was more to the story, but he didn't press. That was Ethan's way, trusting me to share when I was ready. Later, as we sat together under the fairy lights, champagne glasses in hand, he leaned in and whispered, "You look so happy tonight." "I am," I said, and it was the truth. At one point, I caught Hannah's curious glance, silently asking who had been at the gate. I shook my head, mouthing, "Nobody important." And for once, I meant it. Because Michael, with all his arrogance and shame and ghosts of comparison, was no longer my story. My story was here, in Ethan's laughter, in my parents' smiles, in the steady rhythm of love that asked for nothing flashy, nothing borrowed, nothing false. Just me, just us. Real. And that, I realized, was everything.